heroes of the faith. What Hebrews 11 said, we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And even though we might not know the names of that cloud of witnesses, they are heroes in heaven. So tonight, if we are in Judges chapter 10, we're going to begin by looking at a pair of judges. Two that are mentioned here in these first 5 verses that we know so little about. So let's begin with this pair of judges. First of all, we see a man named Tola in the first 2 verses. It says, after Abimelech, there arose to save Israel Tola, the son of Puah, son of Dodo, a man of Issachar, and he lived at Shamir in the hill country of Ephraim. And he judged Israel 23 years. Then he died and was buried at Shamir. So we meet this man named Tola, and he's given to us third in line. We see his father and his father's father. We see people in his family tree, but those names don't mean anything to us either. Sometimes in Scripture we say, we don't know much about this person, but it mentions his father, so we can kind of fill in some blanks. We don't know anything about Tola except for these 2 verses. Well, what about his father? No, we don't know anything about him except this 1 verse. What about his grandfather? No, the only thing we know about his grandfather is this 1 verse. So even though we are given a few people in his family tree, that doesn't really fill in any gaps for us. We know that he's from the tribe of Issachar, but yet he ruled from Shamir, which was a town among the tribe of Ephraim. So for whatever reason, he did not rule in his hometown. Was he kicked out of his tribe? Did he leave the tribe? We have no idea. Just these few details that are given to us in passing. The text says he rose up to deliver Israel. That sounds good. Maybe he was brave. Maybe there was some need and he rose to the challenge. But we don't know. Maybe like Gideon, the angel of the Lord appeared to him and gave him a special calling. Tola, I'm going to use you. But maybe not. Maybe nothing like that happened. Maybe he was like Barak, who said something to someone like Deborah, I'll only go if you go with me. Maybe not. We don't know how it was that Tola rose to the occasion. All we know is that he did. Did he fight some bad guy? We don't know. There's no villain mentioned in this passage. Was there some epic battle where the Lord rained down hailstones? Or did they do something like throw their lanterns to the ground and shout, the sword of the Lord and of Tola? We don't know. None of these details are provided for us. Just what we read right here. He reigned for 23 years. That's impressive. That means that during these 23 years, he led Israel during a time of peace and away from idolatry. And for that, we give him credit. That's what he was called to do, and he did it. Verse 2 is so inglorious, isn't it? He reigned, he died, he was buried. It almost sounds like a pithy eulogy. Here lies Tola, a man who reigned and was died, and today he will be laid to rest. And that's all we know about this guy. Just such a simple statement of fact. But you know what? When I think about that, that's really kind of what life is, isn't it? We're here, we live, we die, we're buried, and then it's just on to the next thing. On to the next person. Life is a vapor. It is so short. And yet sometimes we let so many things get under our skin. You ever do that? You sweat the small stuff. Something doesn't go your way and it ruins your day. You fly off the handle about something. But look at this, man. We live and we die and we're buried. That's it. So we might as well make the most of life, right? Enjoy it while we can. Make the most of every day that we have, because we're here and then we die and we're buried and the world keeps on spinning. I don't want that to sound depressing today, but I just want that to be a reminder to us that while we're here in this vapor-short existence, we need to make the absolute most of it. Tola is an obscure judge for sure. Just 2 verses in the entire Bible. His name even speaks to his anonymity. Tola is the Hebrew word for worm. That's nice, isn't it? Thanks, Mom. Thanks, Dad. Naming me worm. And yet, oddly enough, he's one of 3 Tolas mentioned in the Bible. So, at least 2 other parents thought that worm was a good name for their child. But yet there's a messianic psalm, Psalm 22:6. King David says, I am a worm, I am Tola. I am a worm and not a man, scorned by mankind and despised by the people. That verse is very familiar to us because Jesus quoted from Psalm 22 when he was on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? And Jesus highlighted Psalm 22. So as little as we know about Tola, to me he stands as a picture of biblical humility. Just a worm, not even a person, someone despised by mankind. And in that regard, he is forever linked with Jesus and King David because of citing this psalm on the cross. Unlike Abimelech, the bramble king we talked about last time, who wanted everybody to know his name, we see Tola, who just didn't seem to care if anybody knew his name. He just wanted to be obedient to the Lord. And so he reigned, and he died, and he was buried. Whatever he did, we know that he did what God called him to do. The first judge in this pair that we see is Tola, but then picking up in verse 3, we meet the second half of the pair. His name is Jair. Verse 3 says, after him, after Tola, arose Jair the Gileadite, who judged Israel 22 years. And he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, and they had 30 cities, called Havoth Jair to this day, which are in the land of Gilead. And Jair died and was buried in Canaan. So here we meet somebody who gets 3 verses, a little bit more than Tola, but he only reigned for 22 years, a little bit less than Tola. He was from Gilead, which is an area that we refer to as being the Transjordanic area. Now that might not be a word that we say every day, but there were 2 tribes, and the half tribe of Manasseh. There was Reuben and Gad, and then half of the tribe of Manasseh. In the book of Joshua, when everyone would cross the Jordan River and claim their rightful inheritance in the promised land, these tribes said, we would rather not live on that side of the river, even though that's the promised land, milk and honey and all those great things. We'd rather stay on this side of the river. And so they're called the Transjordanic. They were on the other side of the Jordan River. And that's where Jair ruled from. So that seems like to put him at a disadvantage. He was on the other side of the river, and yet he was able to judge Israel. But the reason I say that is we don't even know what tribe he was from. He could have been from Reuben. He could have been from Gad. He could have been from Manasseh. We just simply don't know. Another guy that we know so little about. But he had 30 sons who rode on 30 donkeys, probably 1 donkey per son rather than 30 donkeys per son. And then 1 city per son. But the idea here is he had 30 sons who each rode on a donkey and kind of governed their own city. That might sound odd to us, but the donkey was an animal of the wealthy in that time period. Having a donkey was a pretty special thing. So this was a note to the original Hebrew audience that let them know that while he was judging Israel, it was relative peace and stability. People didn't just go riding around on donkeys when they were oppressed by some of the enemy nations. The fact that all of his sons would ride around and govern other cities means that everything was good while he was judge. It would be like if this was written today and we would say something like, the stock market was really high while he was president. Or, the jobs were, everybody had a job, or there was a chicken in every pot when he was president. Things that let us know the economy was good during those times. When I step over here, I get quieter. Is my mic not on? Did y'all notice that? Oh, well, am I muted over there?
We hear you fine.
Okay, is it just me? I get it. Okay. Yeah, definitely. This picks me up. All right, I was just curious. It's definitely don't hear myself when I get away from the pulpit. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we see about his 30 sons and 30 donkeys. So everything was good, but no enemies are mentioned here. He doesn't rise up to deliver Israel from anybody. So it doesn't seem like there was even a bad guy. More or less, he just kind of stayed. During a time of peace, he became the judge or the ruler and just kind of stayed that way. So all we know about Tola and Jair is that for a combined 45 years, Israel seemed to be at peace. There's no idolatry that we read of. They're not turning to idols. We assume that everybody is serving the Lord because of their faithfulness for almost half a century. It's interesting to me that Tola is identified by the people that come before him, and Jair is identified by the people that come after him. With Tola, we read about his father and his father's father, and with Jair, we read about his 30 sons. And so to me, they become like a representation of humanity. We all have those that come before us, and then we will have those that come after us. And you and I form the most current link on a chain that is still being formed. So there are people that come before us that we learn from, hopefully. We model ourselves after. We try to avoid their mistakes. Also understanding that people are going to come after us, and we want to lead by example. And although we don't know much about this pair of judges, we believe that they did, in fact, lead by example in such a way that those that would come after them would have good role models to look up to. And that's all we have on these two men, on this pair of judges. But if we flip ahead to chapter 12, we see a quick progression of 3 judges that are mentioned here in just a few verses. In chapter 12, beginning in verse 8, down to 15, we see 3 rapid-fire judges. It says, after him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters he gave in marriage outside his clan, and 30 daughters he brought in from outside for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. After him arose Elon the Zebulunite, judged Israel. And he judged Israel 10 years. Then Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. After him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Parathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Parathonite, died and was buried in Parathon in the land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. So we see this rapid-fire progression of 3 judges that we know even less about than the pair we saw in chapter 10. Their names mean swift, oak tree, and service, respectively. You can do with that information what you will. I only bring that up because that's all we know about them is what their names mean, and they rule for a total of 25 years, giving Israel a quarter century of peace and worship of the Lord. And we pause in the book of Judges there tonight. We see these 5 minor judges, the pair, and then this progression of 3 more. But they're not the only ones in the Bible that are mentioned that we know very little about. And so before we close tonight, I want to talk about a few partners in the ministry, some people that did the things that needed to be done, and we are better off because of it. The first person I want to highlight tonight, this unsung hero, if you will, is Hur, who's found in Exodus chapter 17. In Exodus 17, Israel, they're a new nation. They've just left Egypt. They're trying to get to the promised land, and they are attacked while their caravan is moving. And so Moses appoints Joshua to become the first general of Israel, and Joshua is leading Israel in a battle where they've been attacked, ambushed. And so Moses and Aaron and Hur go up into a mountain. They get the bird's eye view, and they're looking down at the battle. And Moses raises up his arms, which is the posture of prayer in those days. And with his arms uplifted, interceding for Israel, while he was looking down, Israel would prevail in the battle. But he would lower his arms as if his prayers had ended, and then Israel would begin to be defeated. And so he'd raise his arms up again, and the tide would turn. And he'd lower his arms, and the same would happen. So he tried to keep his arms up. The nation depended on it. But his arms got tired, didn't they? So what happens? Aaron and Hur take Moses on either side, and they sit him down on the rock, and they stand on either side of him, and each man holds one of the arms of Moses. I can just picture their hands kind of interlocked like this, standing at Moses' side, as he would rest an elbow on their 2 hands. And it's so much easier for them to stand like this than it is for Moses to stand like this. And his tired arms found strength in the hands of Aaron and Hur. And Israel prevailed. They won their first ever battle in the nation's history. But we have to ask, because we know who Aaron is, but who is Hur? This is the only time in the Bible that Hur is mentioned. Just this one instance. So the Bible doesn't tell us who Hur is. Josephus said that Hur was the husband of Miriam, Moses' sister, which would make him the brother-in-law of Moses and Aaron. The Talmud says that Hur was Miriam's son, making him the nephew of Moses and Aaron. They can't both be right, can they? And so the point is, we don't know who Hur was. Could have been a brother-in-law, could have been a nephew, could have been somebody else altogether. We don't know, but we do know this, that Hur did his job. He helped Israel that day to win this battle. Truly an unsung hero. See, you might be a deliverer like Moses. You might be a high priest like Aaron. You might be a general like Joshua. Or you might be an average Joe, an average Herb. Somebody whose only job is to stand there and hold up the arm of somebody else. And if that's what you're called to do, then you do it. You might not get all the accolades. I can imagine Joshua getting that first star on his uniform after a victorious battle. And there probably wasn't anything given to her. No parades in his name, no books of the Bible. Turn to the book of Her tonight. We don't have anything like this to memorialize a man, but he was faithful to do what God called him to do. And boy, Israel was so much better off because he did it. An obscure man, but he obeyed God and he did his job. That's in Exodus 17, but if we were to turn to Acts 17, we meet another unsung hero whose name was Jason. In Acts 17, in the city of Thessalonica, we read these words in verse 5. It says, "But the Jews were jealous of Paul. And taking some wicked men of the rabble, they formed a mob, set the city in an uproar, and attacked the house of Jason." Who is Jason? Well, we only know about Jason from this one passage. Evidently, Paul and Silas were staying in the house of Jason. And then because they turned the world upside down preaching in the name of Jesus, and an angry mob gets fired up, and they want to grab Paul, and they want to drag him into the amphitheater, and they want to kill him. But Jason kind of creates a diversion. They find Jason, but not Paul. They drag Jason into the town square. They beat Jason. They exact money from Jason. He puts up sort of like what we would call like bond money, almost like he bailed out Paul. And because Jason gives his own money and gives up his own safety, Paul is able to slip away to the city of Berea, where the text tells us many souls were saved there. Boy, Paul and Silas get a lot of credit, right? Deservedly so. They go to Berea, they preach the gospel, and pagans are getting saved. But that would not have happened if Jason did not first give him a place to stay in Thessalonica, but then allow himself to be taken on Paul's behalf. I believe this, that Jason is just as much to credit for the salvation of those Bereans as Paul and Silas. We say, man, Paul and Silas, man, they get the soul winner's crown. They led people to Christ in Berea. I think Jason gets the same rewards that Paul and Silas get. Because if he did not do what he did, Paul might have been captured there at Thessalonica. They might have executed Paul there that day. But Jason bought Paul enough time to go to Berea and ultimately to live several more years. In fact, Paul had an unnamed nephew that we find out about later in the book of Acts, that became aware of a plot to assassinate Paul while he was a prisoner being transported. And because this nephew, who we know nothing else about, because he alerts the authorities, Paul is redirected, his life is spared, and he's given about 3 more years to preach the gospel. Another unsung hero, that unnamed nephew of Paul. Or what about earlier in the book of Acts, when Paul was first converted, and the Jews want to hunt him down and do to him what he had done to the church. But some people that are not named, they're just called disciples of Paul, put him in a basket, and they lower him down a wall, and they allow him to escape. For 3 years he goes, and he studies the scriptures, and the Lord prepares him to become the missionary that he was. If these unnamed people didn't help Paul escape, we would not know the name of Paul or Saul of Tarsus. There ought to be monuments to these people, and yet we don't even know their names. But I believe this, in heaven, their names are known. I believe that their rewards were great in heaven because of their act that day in helping Paul escape. There's other unsung heroes we can talk about. Simon the tanner, we read in Acts chapter 10. He's a person that gave Peter a place to stay. And even though we don't know much about this man named Simon, we know that 3 times he's mentioned in the scriptures, and all 3 times it says that Simon Peter stayed at the house of Simon. That's all we know about him, is he gave Peter a place to stay where he could preach the gospel. But there's Cornelius. Cornelius sent some unnamed people to go to the house of Simon and find Peter and bring him back to the house of Cornelius. Peter tells them about Jesus. Cornelius gets saved. Many other Gentiles get saved. And this is evidence that's used later on in the Jerusalem Council as proof of the fact that God is saving Gentiles, not just Jews. Simon the tanner, Cornelius, unnamed servants that go to find Peter. We don't know much about these people, but salvation was made possible. These people brought Peter to Cornelius. Yes, Peter brought the message, but they brought the messenger. When you bring someone to church and they get saved, you have a part in their salvation. When you bring your tithes into the local church and that money is used to bring in a speaker for revival, to pay the pastor to have camp meetings, to send youth members to camp, to do vacation Bible schools, and people get saved, you have a part in their salvation by giving your money, by inviting to church, by being a witness to your coworkers and neighbors, by just bringing the gospel as you are going. There's so many unnamed people in the Bible, we could go on and on and on, but I think you get the idea tonight. I, like the author of Hebrews, confess that time would fail me to talk about the unnamed people who built the temple or the walls around Jerusalem, the people that Paul thanked God for in his letters, people that brought him joy when he was in prison, the 70 disciples that Jesus sent out preaching, or the woman at the well that changed her town. Not only are both testaments teeming with unsung heroes like her and Jason and these 5 judges we looked at tonight, but church history is also filled with similar examples. For every Billy Graham, there's a Mordecai Ham. Remember Mordecai Ham? He led Billy Graham to Christ. And if Billy Graham is the only convert that Mordecai Ham had ever made, I'd say that was a pretty successful life, wouldn't you? Because Billy Graham gets so much credit, but were it not for Mordecai Ham, Billy Graham might have remained that same rebellious farmer in North Carolina that we know so much about today. And yet there's still obscure Christians all over the world that as we speak are risking their lives to smuggle the gospel into countries where they can't even use their real identities. There's people that translate the Bible into languages that have not even been written down yet. We have people that serve all over the world just simply trying to do what God has laid on their heart to do. Earth may not know their names, but heaven certainly does. So for every Billy Graham, Charles Stanley, David Jeremiah, or Tony Evans, there are tens of thousands more who just live their lives in relative obscurity. They faithfully preach to their congregations. They invite their co-workers to church. They let their light so shine while they're going. They go in the grocery store and tell people about Jesus. They cook meals for the hungry. They give away their time and resources to those that are in need. And it's nothing we would say that would get them a statue down here, but greater their rewards in heaven. Their Father who sees in secret will reward them. Like John the Baptist, our desire should be to decrease so that Jesus may increase. May we live like the words of that old song, I'm just a nobody, trying to tell everybody all about somebody who saved my soul. Or let us sing along with Kitty Suffield in her 1924 hymn. Does the place you're called to labor seem so small or little known? It is great if God is in it, and he'll not forget his own. Little is much when God is in it. Labor not for wealth or fame. There's a crown, and you can win it if you go in Jesus' name. We might become celebrities for Jesus one day, but more often than not, we'll probably live in obscurity. I don't care. Let's just be the people that God has called us to be. Whether they write books about us or we're forgotten within a few years after we're buried. Either way, as long as our name is known in heaven, if we're obedient to our Father, well, that's more than enough for me. Who wants to be an obscure Christian with me tonight? Would you stand, please, with your heads bowed and your eyes closed as Nancy's coming forward? We're going to have a time to respond. Maybe the Lord has laid something on your heart tonight. Maybe there's a challenge. Maybe you sometimes get a little...
Thank you once again for tuning in to our live broadcast here at Putman Baptist Church. As always, we appreciate you being a part of our service from wherever you choose to watch. But we want to let you know that if you should ever have any questions about what you've heard in the morning's message, or questions about how to be saved, to know whether or not you're going to go to heaven one day, or you'd like prayer or anything else, we would love to hear from you. Just because you're not here in the building doesn't mean that you're not still part of this fellowship. So please, feel free to give us a call. You can reach me on my cell phone at 426-3706, or you can call the church office, or send us a message right here on the church Facebook page, and somebody will get in touch with you very soon. Thank you again. God bless you, and hope you have a great day.